up?
Thumbs up. Yeah.
All right, great. Well, thank you everyone for spending some time with us this evening. This is our wrap-up session for the public comments that we've been able to gather over the course of the last couple of days. We've had a real, I think, productive opportunity to visit in small group settings and receive input and feedback from many of you who I see in the participant list were able to attend. And we started this process on Tuesday night with an overview of two concepts and a hybrid of those two concepts, walked through the history of Cruse, and then held 4 small group meetings on 2 on Wednesday, 2 earlier today. And this evening, we're going to be summarizing and sharing with you a synthesis of that input and feedback that we've received. So again, we're really excited about this project. We're very thankful for those that have shared of their time and their thoughts with us. We hope that the synthesis that we will share with you really helps gel the community's interests and goals and objectives into a shared vision and plan for Cruse that meets the goals and objectives of the community. So with that, I'd like to have Mike Dowling, if you could take control of the screen and present the narrowed street option. I will say at a very high level, of the 2 options that have been presented, the narrowed street option and the linear park option, there's been, I think, pretty consistent feedback that the linear park concept is less preferred than the narrowed street concept. And so I think for purposes of our discussion tonight, in terms of wrapping up the synthesis, it just seems to make sense from our perspective to really focus in now on the narrowed street concept. Having received consistent feedback and input from the community, it seemed that vehicular access was of critical importance to those that have participated in the process, and that maintaining that vehicular access was important, as well as being able to maintain parking along Cruse. And Mike Dowling has done a great job in actually adding some parking and trying to maintain parking along the narrowed street concept. And so it seemed like among those 2 mostly shared concerns, it really lent itself to us narrowing down the 2 options to the narrowed street option itself. So for the purposes of this wrap-up session, we're going to be focusing in on the narrowed street concept. And we'll just take it, I think, throughout, maybe starting down at the Park and Cruse intersection, starting there, and maybe we can just work our way down to the north, talking and sharing some of the consistent messages and feedback that we've received throughout this process.
Adam, do you want to talk for a second about
I will say that the residents of Helena share great passion for the community and want to see Cruse enhanced. And it's been my privilege to work with Mike Dowling on this project. Mike is a local architect. His firm, Dowling Architects, is here in Helena. And he, I think, shares that passion for the community and has been very vested in this project. So Mike, maybe you could reorient us with the option 1, and we could start talking about that intersection there at Park and Cruse.
Sure.
How does that sound?
Maybe a thumbs up if people can hear me, or nodding of heads, or okay, we got one. Adam, can you hear me?
Okay. Well, one of the
I don't think Adam.
I think consistent messages that we had heard was regarding the housing. Many like that there was housing that was being added into the project area. Mike's taken some great care to preserve some open space here to the north of the townhomes. And that was something that was echoed by many participants wanting to see this being preserved as green space, and the housing being sensitive to the park that's here, the Dale Harris Park, and that access would still be would not be impeded, and that the enjoyment of that park would not be impeded either. And so there's particular, I think, focus that will be paid to the Dale Harris Park in making sure that that continues as a valued recreational amenity. The other comment about housing was making sure that it's architecturally congruent, that there are standards that will be maintained, and that it will be desirable housing. And also the question had been raised, what type of demographic would be targeted with this type of housing? And so I think that's a discussion that's still active and warrants further conversation with the stakeholders in the community. There are, I think, two potential paths to follow here. One would be just making it available at market rate, and another one would be looking at a mechanism where those units could be preserved and maintained as affordable housing through like a land trust model. So those are some considerations in terms of the housing that we had heard. The other, city staff has reviewed this and provided some feedback as well, and we'll need to pay attention to how the housing is connected to the existing utility infrastructure. And so we'll be continuing to look at that.
Adam, this is Michael O'Neill with the Helena Housing Authority. I just wanted to make a comment and really do appreciate the focus on housing and the efforts to particularly incorporate provisions in your plan to allow for some further development on our site at the Amy Anderson site there at Cruse and Cutler. We own both sides of the Cutler. If you want to show that, yeah, thanks, Mike. You know, it's shown as the X, but what the narrowing of Cutler and the narrowing of Cruse accomplishes there is allows us to, you know, perhaps have a footprint for an additional building there. And we own to the south. That's a property of ours as well to the south there. So it allows us to maximize our land footprint and also take advantage of what is a beautiful vision for, you know, a linear park that really will raise the, you know, the feeling. I think will be a great amenity for the community, but also for the immediate neighborhood, and we'll be proud to be a part of that. So we you know, want to work with this project to make it happen and as soon as possible. So thank you for including us in it.
Yeah, Michael, I think that's it's been something that's been becoming very synergistic as we've been receiving comments, in particular regarding the Neighborhood Center and Rocky Mountain Development Council. And sort of at the end of the day today, we're kind of jumping a little bit. I'll get back to sort of the south end a little bit, but just want to sort of show everyone one of the final thoughts that did kind of come out. And that was, you know, as we understand Rocky Mountain's needs, and after some additional meetings with them, kind of come to realize that, you know, they've been starting to think that their facility was becoming a little bit inadequate for their needs. And the idea of a new facility is something that they've actually been talking about, or an expansion to their existing. And so the thought at the end of the day, as we were looking at potential options even on their existing site, of perhaps locating a new building within the existing parking lot provides some interesting opportunities, because one, if it was a multi-story building, they could have direct access off of Cruse as well, where Cutler comes in immediately opposite what could be a new building on the Emmy Anderson site, and also have lower access that would have access to, you know, sort of the idea of the extension of the walking mall and a little less of a expanded park idea. So not to say that this is a final solution, but sort of a realization that came into play at the end of the day today when we started thinking about opportunities, because this is a parking lot right now, and it's not impossible to expand into existing parking lots with a new facility and then abandon an older facility and repurpose that space as well. So that was one of the neighborhood center in this park area to the south was the topic of a lot of conversation. And not to say that this is a final solution, but we recognize that, you know, what we were showing was probably not an ideal solution either. So that will be a continued discussion topic as we move forward.
And Mike, if I could just add to that, that the idea here is that there would be tuck under parking right on that
Yep.
ground floor there, and so there would be some more efficiency in terms of land consumption, and I think that had been a concern that was brought up during the small group meetings. Was, is there a way in which we can reduce the amount of surface parking that's been prevalent along Cruse? And so I think this highlights just the value of having these public input, you know, small group meetings, is because it allows us to really refine and get to a more appropriate alternative. And I was really excited with this when Mike presented it, because it does preserve green space. One of the alternatives that we had talked about was also putting it on some existing green space, and that seemed to be less well received. So this seems to fit a lot of the different requirements and desires of the community with regards to this concept here. I'd like to take a minute, Mike, if you're okay with this, and see if we could get some feedback on this particular idea and concept of the RMDC, this particular site and concept.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any comments from participants on this option here?
Well, I would have a comment. This is Paul Pacini. Am I coming through?
Yes,
You are.
I'm actually kind of disappointed to see that the neighborhood center might be expanded into that parking lot. I was kind of excited about the idea of a downtown park. I thought that was really a novel idea, and it would kind of make Helena different than a lot of other cities and improve the environment of the downtown area. So I guess that's all I want to say, is that I was kind of excited that the neighborhood center might take another location and open up that area as a park. So I'm kind of disappointed to hear that we're considering allowing them not to relocate, but just expand in the parking lot. That's all.
Thanks, Paul. It looks like Pam Attardo also has a comment. Pam, if you want to just state that, that'd be great.
I was just, there we go. I was just wondering if when the new RMDC building would be built, if it could be graded. Currently, Cruse is like this big berm that is way up above the walking mall. It kind of separates the entire east and west side of Helena. And I'm wondering if there could be spots where it is graded sufficiently where you don't have this precipitous drop, like currently the parking lot of the RMDC building. You just have this drop on the south side of the building, and there's a chain link fence there and some riprap. But so you can't connect on that side. On the north side, there is this pretty nice ADA ramp that goes down to Pioneer Park, but you don't have that on the south side. And I think the more connection, the better.
I think you're right, Pam, and that's kind of what I was starting to allude to. If it was a multi-story building, that would be possible. There could even be perhaps 3 access points, one that's off of Cruse, one that's kind of mid-level on the north side of the building, and then one at a lower level on the south side of the building. I don't know what the exact elevation drop is here, but when I was out there looking at it, I got to believe it's 30 feet or so.
It's pretty significant. They've obviously put a fence there for safety, yeah.
And you know, just to emphasize that, you know, we sort of landed this block in this location during a conversation at the end of the day today, but that doesn't mean that this is a decision that's been made. I mean, that's something that ultimately RMDC and the city and others are going to have a lot of input into what the final best answer is for them. It may be here, it may be someplace else. There aren't any like end decisions that have been made at this point.
Right. I'm just suggesting that, you know, the more connection that can be made and the more, you know, reduction of the grade there would be beneficial to connect.
And eliminate a big scar on this that really can't look good in any other way.
Mm-hmm.
This is Michael O'Neill. The RMDC building, the neighborhood center has some vital services that are, really create vibrancy in the neighborhood there. So the ability to maintain that somewhere in the neighborhood would be important. The thing that I find, the thing that has to be taken into consideration is just the cost of replacing or moving the building is a real barrier to that. The building that's there with a unique set of circumstances and funding sources that allow it to be an affordable building, I think. And so I think there will be some challenges of relocating and creating a whole other building, either on site or in the neighborhood. So that's a real challenge. But I do think the overall improvement to Cruse, even if RMDC stayed in its current setting, was just expanded upon, I think the elements of this plan could be incorporated, making the whole, you still get the impact of this change in Cruse, which takes it away from that kind of industrial highway feel to a very vibrant living space. That would be great for the community.
Well, I'm glad that aspect of it is coming across, because I do think even in this narrowed street option, if you start to envision, I'm trying to think of a good street in Helena that's a similar scale, maybe Broadway, with the street trees that line it, that create canopies over the street as you're driving down it, is much more intimate in scale. And the difference here is we still end up with, on either side of the street or one side of the street or the other, wherever it ends up, but in this case on the east side, fairly significant greenway. And so we really sort of get the best of both worlds, where we still have this linear park idea happening. It just happens to be adjacent to a narrowed, probably slower speed street that is very user friendly.
Yeah, and Mike, if I could add to what you've just stated, just as a point of clarification with the concept that you presented in doing the new facility on the existing parking lot. The intent is not to just do an expansion and have 2 facilities here on this site. The intent is that once this new facility is constructed, the old facility will be demolished, and the green space that you see here would be put in its place. And so there would be an enhancement and expansion of the city park. And, you know, I think because of the efficient use of land here with the tuck under parking, it really creates that feel for that expansion of the green space, as well as meeting the facility needs of RMDC. So I just wanted to make that distinction, that this concept isn't proposing keeping both buildings. It would be building that new facility, relocating RMDC into the new facility, and demolishing the old one and replacing that with new green space.
You know, and I would also add that, you know, one of the things that we've been getting some pretty consistent positive reaction to is the idea of an outdoor amphitheater as a performance space, which, you know, in the summer does become a very active element with music and theater and plays. And I think we still have an opportunity to do that in this area because of the topography that's there, which is natural. And so I think as we start to look at a final plan with options still, we'll look at a way to perhaps incorporate that into even this narrowed street option. I'm just sort of dragging a bubble around to indicate where that possibly could happen.
Just for what it's worth, there are active plans or active discussions, no plans right now, but active discussions to locate a performance space at the foot of Hill Park. In fact, Grand Street is thinking about trying to do South Pacific in that venue this summer.
Oh, wow.
So there's talk about putting a cement platform essentially on Fuller or adjacent to Fuller that would allow an audience to sit up on the hill on Hill Park and witness the performance down at the bottom of the hill on Fuller, or off Fuller. So just for, and again, it's in discussions now, although I have a feeling that it's going to come to fruition fairly quickly. And I'm not sure what the redundancy would do then, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, thanks, Lee.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Adam.
Well, I was just gonna ask Mike if you could share with the group the parking along this narrow street concept and how you've been able to add additional parking along the corridor between Park and Cutler, and how you've worked to maintain parking beyond Broadway as well. I know that's been a big concern that's been brought up consistently, you know, that we don't want to remove parking because there are many who feel that parking is constrained, and that they're constantly receiving inquiries and complaints about parking. So Mike, could you maybe speak to the group about the parallel parking that you've been able to incorporate into the design?
Yep. So one of the things I'll point out just with some simple lines, basically from Broadway to the south along Cruse, there's only a couple of spaces actually to have parallel parking. And that's between this spot right here and right about there, and then right along here to a point about there, only on one side of the street. And that's due to the fact that because of these sort of on-ramp and off-ramp designs that were there for its original purpose, there's no ability to park from this point to the south or on the east side of Cruse at all. And so the narrowed street idea, just by its design, allows for parallel parking on both sides of the street everywhere that the street is. So on this part of Cruse Avenue, we're going to increase street parking. I'll have to do an actual count, but 5 times, maybe 6 times, which I think is a good thing because it definitely will increase the ability for people to park for the residential components, but also the park use, bicycle use, heading into the south, trail system areas, as well as just the downtown area in this part of town.
Thank you, Mike.
I saw Pam did make the comment about the connection of the fire tower and Fire Tower Park and increasing that. That was a lot of comments and discussion that I think was a positive thing coming out of this scheme and all of the schemes. And our, sort of we're making little gestures at this point of stairs that we could create that lead to the trails that come up to the fire tower. We'll want to study that a little bit more. But not only that, but providing the ability to have a stair that goes down to the pedestrian underpass to the park's Anchor Park, which really doesn't exist right now. So we do provide an enhanced ability to get from the Fire Tower Park down to Anchor Park and the walking mall. This pedestrian underpass currently does come across the Emmy Anderson property onto the side streets. It's just, it isn't linked very well to the rest of it. And so I think enhancing that is something that everybody has seen as a positive. We also, I think, most people have liked the idea of, this node. Even in this scenario, I think the idea of having something like, this emblem, and we have this down in the Great Northern where there's a raised intersection, and use brass inserts into multicolored concrete, and even though it's a drive area, it becomes a focal point and a transition point that at sometimes could be used for events or things like that, but makes that sort of literal connection between the fire tower, that space, and the walking mall and the south end of this park area. So that's been well received.
Mike, in regards to that space there, that's above the pedestrian tunnel.
Correct.
And I just made a comment in chat, but the ability to make some improvements to the pedestrian tunnel under Cruse as part of this project, just some, while you're doing work.
Oh yeah.
Possible to bring daylight tubes to bring daylight into the tunnel and make some general welcoming improvements like softer lighting, more just a welcoming feel that people would, people do use the pedestrian tunnel, but I think it could be upgraded to make it all part of this whole project as well. But I think bringing daylight in during the day through some sort of tubes or something would be a nice addition.
Yeah, that's a good observation. So Adam, do you want to sort of keep moving to the north with or is there more in this area that we want to expand upon?
I think we've touched on, excuse me, each of the, I think, major points that we needed to discuss and feedback that has been received. I think a couple of just general observations regarding the introduction of, additional green space along Cruse Avenue is being sensitive to environmental impacts, utilizing native grasses, Water conservancy, those types of things would, I think, be included in the elements of the design. And the next step for us as we look at parking and the impacts associated with that, we will do an assessment. We will do a count of how many parking spaces would be taken and added back throughout this design, so that the community can understand what those impacts or enhancements will look like. So I did want to mention that in general.
I think the the other thing that I think has been well received and some of the details need to be worked out are just the enhanced pedestrian ability to move from the neighborhoods to the east into the downtown, both by reducing the walking distances where the intersections happen, but even as we were talking about the Fire Tower Park connecting to Anchor Park, the idea of enhanced connectivity at other points with some details that need to be worked out, access into the parking garage, coordination of service access with some of these things. But in general, that's been well received.
Okay. I would like to highlight a comment by Pam. So Pam has suggested that perhaps we go a different direction with the underpass on Cruse, that the pedestrian underpass there, and eliminating the tunnel and creating an above ground link through parkland. That could be a very interesting concept, particularly if grading across the street were to be changed through a new building for RMDC, how that might come into play as well. Perhaps that could be a potential alternative in that area. I thought that was a very, very interesting idea from Pam.
Yeah, I was just reading that as well. I think the idea of an elevated crossing would probably be very difficult to do. I mean, I know that sort of thing has been explored elsewhere in Helena, and they become cost prohibitive. I do think that we are providing a more friendly at-grade crossing in these solutions, and we can maybe work on making those even better. But if we do maintain Cruse as a street, there's always going to be that pedestrian vehicular coordination that needs to happen. Maybe the thing to do is to provide both an enhanced, safer experience through the tunnel, like Michael was suggesting, but also looking at enhanced at-grade access as well.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for addressing that. I know that improving access to the Fire Tower Park has been a consistent comment as well. And I think we've touched on that. We've touched on working through the utility connections. I know there's been some concern as we move from Broadway up to 6th about how these houses would connect into the utility system. And those will be further explored with city engineer. And there are a number of townhomes here that actually would make sense to just tie into the utilities off of Warren Street. I think the ones that front Cruse by the Chamber Building and by the lot next to the Jackson Street structured parking will involve a little bit more research on perhaps how those tie into the utility system. But certainly those are very good observations that we'll need to figure out moving forward. And I wanted to see if everyone heard me when I was talking about the targeted demographic for the housing. Was that something that everyone had heard, or should I repeat that? I was having some technical difficulties on my end.
I think it's probably worth repeating.
Okay. So the townhomes, I think there are two methods or manners in which those could be developed. One would be to pursue market rate townhomes, working with a private sector developer to just acquire the land and build housing that would meet the market where it is. Another concept that has been discussed and was brought up in the small group meetings was a land trust model, where the community would maintain some control and restrictions on the income bracket that could purchase these townhomes, and there are mechanisms that could be put in place that would essentially financially penalize the transition of that housing to something that would be market rate. And that would be a way to maintain some attainable and affordable housing within the downtown. That's been a very consistent message and concern that's been raised by almost all stakeholders, is the lack of attainable workforce housing. These are, when we talk about that means different things for different people and for different communities. But I think in this case, it would really be for, workforce housing. So those that are working in the area, being able to accommodate that income demographic.
Adam, there is a raised hand, Paul Pacini.
Yes, Paul.
Paul, you're on mute.
Okay, how's that? Is that better?
There you go.
Yep.
Sorry about that. So to start over, you mentioned utilities a little while ago, and that made me think of just general lighting along this newly developed portions of Cruse, which are going to be very park-like and probably would entice people to take walks in the evening. And just for safety, I'm sure there has to be some sort of lighting. What kind of thought has gone into that?
Yeah, that's a great comment. I would say that's a level of detail that we haven't really started to address, but would definitely be part of looking at what the streetscape solution is. When we take this to the next level, we usually start to study cross sections of how this street can function and how the bike lanes and pedestrian pathways all sort of react to each other with street trees, and including lighting and benches, planter areas and those kinds of things. I mean, I would anticipate that we would have lower level pedestrian scale lighting, not the taller, more industrial type of lighting, and would want to have something that is consistent with kind of the historic feel of Helena's downtown, even though this is a newer street, but lighting that is perhaps 13 or 14 feet tall, not 27 feet tall like you see in more busier street areas.
That all sounds good, Michael. I'm sure we're all aware that there's some discussions going on with Northwestern Energy right now about changing over the lights citywide. And I know there's a lot of concern about the LEDs, not in the sense that they're LEDs so much, but that they're very bright. And so I just a comment, I would hope when lights are considered more seriously that we look at a lower Kelvin light, like 3000 Kelvin rather than 5000.
Right. Yeah.
And I like the idea of the decorative lights. So good, thank you.
So some good comments from the chat. Pam and Lee brought up doing a mixture of both market rate and affordable. or land trust properties. That's a great idea. Diana Hammer mentioned looking at green infrastructure, water-wise landscaping, things like rain gardens and bioswales. I think that would be very intriguing.
I
I'd
do
like
too.
that. That would be awesome. Okay. Well, Mike, can you think of any of the major points of discussion and things that we had highlighted in the synthesis of interviews that we haven't been able to touch on quite yet?
No, I think we've hit all the high points. I
Yeah.
actually really like the chat. I finally figured out how to follow these chats while I'm presenting, and it's helpful to be able to read what people are saying. And I'm really excited that people are enthusiastic about the opportunities that this really presents. Having lived in Helena for almost my entire life, which is starting to become a long time, Cruse has always struck me as an odd part of our town. When I was young, never even engaged with it at all, and now I actually use it. But we don't have anything like this in downtown Helena, and I get back to when we were first thinking about the linear park idea. This is still a linear park, yet it sort of hits the notes on all the important things that we need to maintain, fire and police and emergency access, and the ability to get north to south in a way that is safely and meets the community's needs. And the other thing I really like about this solution is I think it's affordable. I think this is something that if the city and the residents really get behind and say, let's make this happen, it's doable without being $100 million project that is never going to be affordable.
Yeah, and I agree. I know one of the questions that people had raised was, how is this financed? And there are programs for active transportation, concepts like this, the Transportation Alternative Program through the Department of Transportation has funding available for this. And I believe it's a 95% federal contribution, and the community only needs to put up 5%. We're working on a grant application for another community for something of a similar nature. And so the ability to leverage, local funds with outside dollars is, the name of the game, right? That really helps reduce the cost of the project and can preserve local dollars for other projects that need to occur. But my hope, and I echo what you said, Mike, is that hopefully this can be something that is catalytic in terms of creating an additional desire and momentum within the community of helping to create more of a connective fabric between the neighborhoods around the downtown and downtown itself, and looking at improving pedestrian and safety and access along Cutler Street. We talked about that, and other areas as well.
Well, and I just also want to sort of throw back to some earlier discussions about something that I describe as it's really a cart and horse or chicken and egg kind of thing. But our downtown right now sort of rolls up the sidewalks and turns out the lights at 5 o'clock at night when businesses close. And there's been continuous discussion over the years about, why don't more businesses locate down here? Why don't more restaurants stay open? We have bars, but that's not necessarily the only thing we need. The reality is that when we create a vibrant downtown that has, in particular, housing that is intended to support the downtown and ease of access from that housing into the areas that we want them to be in, the downtown starts to come alive. And the reality is this housing and this sort of thing can literally be the spark that lights the fire of businesses staying open late and our downtown having that vibrancy that, you know, is a good thing.
Absolutely.
Hey, Mike, a question for you. Just looking at this screen in front of us, there's a lot of parking lots, there's parking garages. The idea that, you know, we were talking earlier about building over parking lots and things, would you see any ability to even increase the housing by using some of the surface lots and, you know, turning, you know, garages but going up from them using topography and along there? I don't know, at any of these spaces.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Michael, because I think it was Kathy Macefield. It really didn't get expanded upon when she was making the comment, but I'm going to slide over to the left a little bit. And pointing specifically to this lot along Wong Street, where we do have probably a manageable elevation change between Cruse and the lot below that might be 1 or 1.5 stories high. And it is possible, I think, to propose elevated housing that is at street level on Cruse that does not, it's built over parking down below, that does not eliminate parking. I think this is kind of what you're alluding to. And I want to look at this a little bit closer, because if we can add the housing and not eliminate parking, we truly have a win-win. Might be slightly more expensive to build because you're going to basically have tuck under parking underneath these units that are above them. But it isn't like building parking garages with housing on top of it, because it's essentially space that's right there. We might lose a few parking spaces for structure and things like that, but there may be additional opportunities in this area particularly. I'll just draw some boxes. I mean maybe along here, there's a grade change that might be manageable. Maybe in here, this area is a pretty substantial drop. You know, we got to look at depths and things like that, but I'm going to take a closer look at that as we continue to refine this. I'll change these boxes to red so they match what else we're doing. But that's a great comment, Michael, and I'm glad you brought it up. So if we can do these things without eliminating parking, there's no reason not to do it.
Okay, are there any other comments, questions, or concerns from the participants?
Yes, I have another question. What about the timeline? What are we looking at for future planning time and reviews, and when might this be done?
That's a great question, Paul. So we haven't gotten into that level of detail at this point in the process. What I can tell you is, as we go through and refine this, what that process will look like. So we are going to be taking this public input and the synthesis of comments and feedback, and we'll refine this narrowed street option and spend a couple weeks working through that, at which point we'll have another public meeting and we'll invite another round of feedback and commentary, refine that concept some more, and then provide really a final concept to the city. And then that is, and there's some additional scope of work elements associated with our engagement in terms of looking at financing options for the project and those types of things. But this is, but that would be the completion of our engagement, would be the delivery of a concept and financing options for moving that forward. Where the city takes it from there, I think is still yet to be defined. But what our objective is to really create a plan that can be actionable and be implemented once it has been delivered.
So Michael, I'd be interested in the future Zoom meeting. I sort of accidentally stumbled into this meeting, reading it in the newspaper on the day after your first meeting. Is there some way you could do a mailing list or something and make sure that we're all notified?
Yeah, I think that would be a question for Michael McConnell or Sharon Hagen with the city. If that, maybe there are utility inserts that could be included. I'm not sure on that one. I'll reserve comment on that to the city.
Sure, Paul, that's definitely an option that we can do. And I've got your email address, and I've gotten some other comments and phone calls that way. So yes, we'll be notifying everyone that way of any further progressions in the project, including future meetings.
Good, thank you.
Looking at the north end of this project, has anything been discussed about incorporating the 7th Avenue Gymnasium into the project? I know on the BID, we did some work and research on trying to convert that into a public market, but the cost was prohibitive presently. But I was wondering whether or not, because that's prime real estate right there, particularly for the downtown, if we could figure out exactly what to do with the building.
Yeah, that's a great question, Lee. I know that there's been a feasibility study that's been conducted on that building that we have in our possession that we've looked at. It could certainly be something that we could include and highlight as a step in this implementation would be to look at the 7th Street gym for an adaptive reuse. That's a great comment, Lee.
Yeah, the topic did come up briefly when we were discussing the neighborhood center, and kind of quickly realized that wasn't probably the right use there. Yeah, you know, again, that's one of those things that 20 years in Helena and 7th Avenue gym, there's always a mystery on how to really adequately reuse that facility. It is school property, although I think that can be dealt with.
Well, it's a great structure. I mean, I've gone through, and when we were doing our planning, one of the fundamental issues is you've got to remove that upper deck, the former track, and that's a very expensive proposition in an old building like that. But the building's got lots of potential for various things. It's just, I don't think anybody has wants to take up the bit to be able to, or to jump into it, because it's a formidable project.
You know, sometimes I think it's just things need something that kickstarts people's interest in it. And, you know, with the redevelopment of the old IR building and with this sort of investment in Cruse Avenue for adaptive reuse and rethinking how Cruse is a benefit to the city rather than sort of an eyesore, it may be just the thing that's needed for someone to come along and say, hey, I've got the perfect solution for 7th Avenue gym. Yeah, it's, again, sort of that chicken and egg thing. You can't force something to happen. Something has to feel right and be right, and then ultimately it happens.
Adam or Mike, it looks like Michael O'Neill has his hand raised again. I'm not sure if it's from the time before or a new comment, but go ahead, Michael.
No, I think I left it up. I apologize. Just one question on this, the photo in front of us. Is this an older picture? Is this the current Central School?
It's older.
Older, yeah. That's okay.
Google Earth only updates their stuff every so often.
Okay.
I'll see a question. Is the 7th Avenue Gym feasibility study available to review? I'll look at who sent me that study and see if that's the case. And if so, we'll figure out a way to make that available.
I know the school district is the one that commissioned that initially, and it was through a CDBG grant, a PAR study. So I'm fairly sure it's public knowledge.
Okay, great.
Adam, it looks like Paul has his hand raised. And there's a comment from Diana Hammer as well. So Paul, if you go ahead.
Actually, it's not me. Becky wants to say something.
I just have a request. Could you move the slide to the south? Because I came late and I want to see the Cruse Cutler intersection. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. You can take our hand off. You can.
Okay.
Okay, looks like that feasibility study is public record, and there's a comment about having those homes be solar ready and equipped with solar panels. I love that idea. That's great. So Mike McConnell, is there a way that we could have that feasibility study available on the city website?
You bet. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe we could just incorporate that into the current project website.
Yeah, we can do that. I can get that up tomorrow,
Awesome. Thank you.
along with any other documents that are created as part of the process so far. So.
Okay. Sounds great. Okay. Well, if there are not any other comments, I just want to thank everyone for their time, their passion for the community, and the input that's been provided throughout this process. We're really excited and enthused. We think that this has been really productive and is really pointing us in the right direction. So we'll be sharpening our pencils over the course of the next couple weeks, refining the narrowed street option, and looking forward to having another public meeting with that refined design, and we can go from there. Thank you everyone so very much for your time. We appreciate it, and have a wonderful evening.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.